So today we're going to focus on another type of essay, right, which is known as the advantage-disadvantage style of essay. Now we had a look at opinion essays. So just like that, this is another type. So we have opinion essays, we have discussion essays, we have advantage-disadvantage essays, we have cause and effect, we have problem solution, right? And we also have direct essay questions. So different types. We're having a look at advantage-disadvantage style essays. Right, so when we have a look at the advantage-disadvantage style essay, we could mainly see two types. So one could be advantages. They could ask you for the advantages. They could ask you for the advantages and disadvantages. There's another style where they could ask you outweigh. Do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? Okay, so these are the two main types that you could see on the advantages, disadvantages style of essays, right? Now, when we are writing this essay, we need to have a look at the structure. So you know that an essay has three main parts: introduction, body and conclusion. If you remember in the essay structure, we had a look at some of the structures, right? Now, this one I didn't go to touch more in detail because it's quite similar to the other styles. However, let's have a look at the structure in detail in this lesson. So when you look at the introduction, you obviously paraphrase the question. Now, some questions could be merged with your opinion, okay? So, do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? What is your opinion? So, if they ask you like that, you would have to put your opinion. And then here, what are you going to write? What exactly are you going to write in the essay? Okay? So different people, as I told you, call it with different names. You have a background statement, then you have a thesis statement, then you have an outline statement. So it's all right, whatever they call it, as long as you've got those elements that I'm telling, that's fine, okay? So make sure you paraphrase the question. If they ask you for your opinion, make sure you have the opinion and then put down what exactly are you going to write in your essay. Okay, now some of you might see that they don't really put down what exactly that they are going to write in the essay, but they paraphrase the question, they put their opinion, and then you would see that some of the sample answers have got an 8, 7.5, 8. It is possible. It's not impossible, right? But this is the most appropriate structure though, right? So when we have a look at the body paragraphs, we can see that, we start with the topic sentence, we explain, we write an example, and then we conclude the paragraph, concluding sentence, or we write down a linking sentence. Sometimes it's kind of merged with the example, right? So we might not really write a clear concluding sentence. However, you could write it this way, okay? Where you have a topic sentence, so you tell us what exactly you're going to write in that paragraph, and then you explain the advantage. So your topic sentence, for an example, could say, individuals have advantages by using the internet. Okay, so there we would be only talking about how useful the internet is for the individuals, right? So you explain more about it and you give details, and then you write an example. Or depending on the question, you could write the topic sentence, okay, and explain it, and then talk about the consequences, right? So state the result. It depends on the question, all right? Same structure is followed for body para 2. If you feel that you need another body para to explain, you could use a body para 3 with the similar structure. And here, the difference is here, if they ask you for advantages and disadvantages, body para 1 talks about the advantages. However, body para 2 talks about the disadvantages. Right? So that's the only difference, right? And then you explain the disadvantage. It should be disadvantage, okay? And then you give details. Right, so next, the final para that you have would be your conclusion. So you summarize the key points that you wrote in your body, and if they have asked you for the opinion, you kind of remind the reader your opinion. So basically, this is the overall structure, right? Now, before we have a look at some of the examples, more in detail or practice questions, let's have a look at one together. Okay, so we'll do one like we've done in the other essay styles. We'll do essay together so we can have a look at it in detail, and then we can start doing some practice questions, right? Alright, so let's have a look at an example, right? The development of tourism contributed to English becoming the most prominent language in the world. Some people think this will lead to English becoming the only language to be spoken globally. What are the advantages and disadvantages to having one language in the world? So here, let's analyze our question, right? Now, the development of tourism contributed to English, which is the language, right, becoming the most prominent language in the world. So, some people think that this will lead to what? English being the only language to be spoken globally, right? So, they're asking you two things. They're asking you what are the advantages and disadvantages to having one language in the world, okay? Now, before you start writing, it's nice to have your little map drawn. Right, so let us analyze the question, okay? Now, here they talk about language, right? The development of tourism contributed to English, which is a language, becoming the most prominent language in the world, right? So some people think that this will lead English for becoming one of the most popular, or rather the only language spoken globally, okay? So only language spoken globally. So they're asking you for two things. What are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of English being the only language in the world, right? Now I'd like to start off with our little mind map, okay? So we're going to talk about English as a language. That is why I put EL, okay? So in our introduction, right, do we really need to write an opinion? Not really. They're not asking us for an opinion. They're just asking us for the advantages and disadvantages. So I would paraphrase the question and write what. Okay. Then body para 1, I would write the advantages. It's good because globally we can talk to anyone. Okay, so communication becomes quite easy because everyone talks the same language. And things become quite easy because the culture tends to be quite similar then. But what are the disadvantages? The disadvantages would be that, there's no variety and it would kill the cultures, right? So one thing is that it would be killing all the local languages, so no variety in language. And no traveling. Because people don't want to travel if the culture and the language is the same, where people really don't want to travel to get a new experience, right? So there are advantages as well as disadvantages. Finally, you can write the conclusion, which is a summary. Now, some students might want to put their opinion here, right? And say, okay, I think there are more advantages or there are more disadvantages. But really in the question, they're not asking us that, okay? So we write the introduction first, okay? It is thought by some people that English which is now the most widely spoken language in the world may one day predominate over all other languages and result in their eventual disappearance. This essay will discuss the advantages and then you can write whatever the advantages are that you have in mind and drawbacks. If you have in mind the drawbacks, you could write it exactly, okay, of having one global language, right? So I suggest it would be good for you to actually put down your points here. So the points are here, the ones that you've thought about: global communication, no variety in language, and the languages will die soon, okay? Here you could put die soon. The other languages will die soon, and then people would not want to travel. You don't have to write these points. These are just examples. You could change them as you want, okay? But what is important is that you paraphrase the question, okay? So it is thought by some people that English, which is now the most widely spoken language in the world, may one day predominate over all other languages and result in the eventual disappearance. So that's paraphrasing the question. They haven't asked us for an opinion, so I haven't put an opinion, right? Some students tend to put it, but I feel that's not needed unless they ask you for it, okay? So in the question, if they ask you, write the advantages and disadvantages and what is your opinion, then you could also put your opinion, all right? Okay, so this bit is basically paraphrase the question. And then from here onwards to here, this bit goes to answer the question, what are you going to write in this essay? Okay, so we move on and we start writing our body paragraphs. So the first body para, which I'm going to focus on, is I'm going to talk about the advantages, okay? Right. One evident benefit to having one global language is that it would enable greater understanding between countries. In other words, if everyone spoke one language, there would be complete understanding between not only countries but all people throughout the world which would promote learning, the flow of information and ideas. Another reason that one language would be advantageous is that it would help economic growth. With all the people, or with all the people speaking the same language, there would be fewer barriers and therefore trade would flourish between countries resulting in a healthier world economy. Right, so when we have a look at this paragraph, one evident benefit, okay, so we talk about benefits here, and that's very, very clear in your topic sentence that it would have, or it would enable a greater understanding between the countries. So therefore, in other words, you emphasize what you want to tell, that everyone, when they speak one language, it would be easier for people to understand each other. Now, it's not only between countries, but also between people, the understanding would be much easier. Okay. Now, I've also put down another reason, because for disadvantages, I wrote two, right? If you want, you could just put one, but I've also put down another reason. Okay. So another reason, and then I say, okay, it would be good for your economic growth in terms of a country, because when there are less communication barriers, right, therefore the understanding between countries would be much healthier, and that would help the economy as well. So I've spoken about advantages, and I've spoken about two advantages in this para. Okay, so next, what do we need to write? We need to then focus on the disadvantages. Okay, so basically the second body para, okay, now the first body para is what we wrote here, but the before one was the introduction, then the first body para. The second body para that I'm going to write would focus on the disadvantages. All right, okay. On the other hand, there are obvious disadvantages having one global language. Firstly, it would mean that all other languages would eventually disappear and along with them their cultures. The diversity of cultures is one of the joys this world has to offer. Each culture is unique with its own way of life and own perspectives of the world which would be lost if there were only one language. Secondly, it would result in the collapse of tourism because there would be no reason to travel for pleasure and interest if all the countries had the same language and similar cultures. This would devastate many countries economically, that rely on tourism as a source of income. Right, so looking at this paragraph, let's see. Here, I've kind of written down the disadvantages, right? So I've used cohesive devices on the other hand to show that I'm talking about a different view, right? That there are disadvantages. Firstly, what would it mean? That it would mean that the cultures would be disappeared, right? And the diversity would die. Secondly, what would happen? It would be a problem for the tourism industry because people don't want to travel, people don't want to have a new experience, and therefore this would mean that the countries relying on tourism would face economic problems. Okay, so I've written the positives, I've written the negatives. Now what am I going to write? My conclusion. Okay, so this is what I want you to understand, the structure: intro, advantages, disadvantages, conclusion, right? So I haven't really signposted for examples because I've explained it, right? It would be nice for you to put an example as well. So let me finish off by writing the conclusion. In conclusion, or to conclude, while there are positives to having one global language, too much would be lost as a result. Maintaining maintaining local languages and cultures should be prioritized to ensure a rich heritage for future generations. So here we have written the conclusion, and you signpost by saying in conclusion. Okay, you give a summary, okay, where you say, okay, there are positives, but there are more negatives. More could be lost because you lose your economy, you lose your culture, the diversity, right? So there will be more disadvantages. So maintaining these local languages and cultures should be a priority because in future, the generation should be able to see these different cultures, right? So basically, this is the structure for an advantage, disadvantage style essay. Okay, intro, advantages. So I explain two advantages. Then in the next body para, I write the disadvantages, explain about it, and then I write a conclusion. All right. So you can pause the video and go through it more in detail if you want to, right? If not, we could probably move to the next question. Now let's have a look at practice question 1. In many countries, women are allowed to take maternity leave after the birth of a newborn. Do you think the advantages of maternity leave outweigh the disadvantages? So this is kind of your opinion. Do you think the positives are more than the negatives? I'd like you to take a few minutes and think about it and think about the points that you would lay out to write a good essay. off you go, take about 5 minutes and jot down a sketch for your answer. Right, so I hope you would have finished, right? I'm also going to draw up a little sketch. So in this one, let's talk about maternity. In the intro, they're asking you, do the advantages of maternity leave outweigh the disadvantages? I would say yes, it does. Okay, so I would say yes, it does. Now, why do I say that? Number one, advantage one, okay. I would say that obviously women are physically and emotionally, I wouldn't say they're down, but it's a bit different. Physically, you're different. Emotionally, you're quite different. So you need that time to kind of become stable, okay? So I think it is quite important, okay? So it's good. And when you have maternity leave, your job is also secure, right? So job security is also there. So I think, yes, it is something good, right? I mean, if you talk about the disadvantages, right? Let's say advantage 1 and 2. Disadvantage is that your career progression is being hindered, okay? So when you take maternity leave, you're away from work, it takes away your career a bit because you don't have the time, you don't have the capacity that you had before to put into everything that you have, okay? I'm not saying you wouldn't completely. It might take some time for you to be on track, okay, or to get back on track. So it would mean that your career progression sometimes would not happen at all. Some people give up their jobs. Some people come back, but they're very slow. And then some people come back, they're on it straight away. So it depends on your capacity, right? So I would say career progression could be hindered, right? But still, because of that, okay, even though career progression is being hindered, I still think that it is better to have maternity leave. So in conclusion, I would still say, it's yes, and then I would put down a summary as to why I would say yes, okay, right? So I write my introduction, I write the advantages, I write the disadvantages, at least one, and refute back and say, nope, I still think there should be maternity leave so that the mom is stable, she has enough time to get used to the newborn, for her to be emotionally stable and things like that. I feel there should be maternity leave. However, you can disagree if you want to, right? It's your choice. So let us write down an answer, and this time I'll write the complete answer so that we can have a look at it together, okay? And then as you go on the practice questions, you can start doing it on your own, okay? People from many countries believe that it is important for females to spend time being with their newborn during the first few months after giving birth instead of going to work. In my opinion, I do think that the benefits outweigh its කියන එකේ ඉඳන් පස්සේට ගන්නයි drawbacks. Firstly, this essay will discuss right. So here you can think about the points that you want to write. Okay, first this essay will discuss which and secondly which points, right? So you could jot down what exactly you want to write. Okay, on the one hand, there are advantages of taking maternity leave. Firstly, the precious time helps women to recover after giving birth in terms of health and emotion. Giving birth is considered as a precious moment which takes females many physical and emotional efforts. Thus, leaving their job for some time will give them time to recover. Secondly, spending time with a newborn baby is considered as a time for mum to assist the baby in his or her early life. During this time, mum plays a crucial role in taking care of her baby. On the other hand, there are disadvantages. One of them is that allowing women to take maternity leave from work may result, it's not always, may result in lower productivity. For example, new mums are sometimes qualified accountants, then their absence may affect the company's accounting process. Another drawback would be that it hinders their career progression. We can continue it, right? So here I have written the introduction, okay, and I've told what are the advantages, but I would also talk about at least, the disadvantages to show that, there's other side of this, and then refute back and say, however, there are still more positives than the negatives because the newborn needs a mum for some time, right? So you could take the other side and you can still say, no, I don't agree with it. I think there are more disadvantages than advantages, and then talk about what you feel, okay? So this is another possible structure because it talks about outweigh. Now this is a difficult style, as I told you, Because it talks about the outweigh, that's why I've written both sides so that you can refute and then come back and say no. However, even though there are disadvantages, there are more positives when the mother takes maternity leave. That's my view. If you don't agree with it, you can do it vice versa. Okay? Right. So after that, you could obviously write your conclusion. Okay? So let me just write the conclusion as well so that it finishes this answer. So you can, continue this, right? Let me just write down the conclusion. Okay. Let me change the color. In conclusion, although there are drawbacks, I strongly believe that the merits are more important and it should be considered carefully. So I've just written a very short conclusion. You could add a few more things if you like to, right? And then talk about maybe what are the drawbacks and what are the positives, and then come into this point and talk about your opinion. But I've kept it quite short, right? So this is just an outline for you. Now let's have a look at another practice question, and I'd like you to start doing these questions on your own, right? A lot of places in the world rely on tourism as a main source of income. Unfortunately, tourism can also be a source of problems if it is not well managed. What are the advantages and disadvantages of tourism in the modern world? Do you think that the benefits of tourism outweigh its drawbacks? Okay, so they're asking you for two things. One thing is, what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? That's one part. And then, do you think the benefits outweigh the drawbacks, right? So you need to first draw up a mind map and talk about the positives. Now, if you take tourism, what are the positives? So let's have a look at some of the positives. Now, you need to come up with your own ideas. I'm just giving you some. So what are the positives of tourism? Obviously, it provides job opportunities. Okay. It helps the economy. So you need to think about more positives if you want to put more. Now, what are the drawbacks? There could be cultural issues because of mixed marriages. When tourists come in, you start dating each other, and then sometimes it ends up in a marriage. Then there are cultural issues and problems that happen, right? And then obviously the diseases that come in, okay? So sometimes we get AIDS and other kind of diseases which are not very prominent in Sri Lanka or anywhere in the world, okay? So this could also be another problem. So you could think about the different pros and cons, right? And you could jot down your own mind map. Now, do you think that the benefits of tourism outweigh its drawbacks? I personally think it does, right? Some of you can say no, it doesn't. It brings more bad than it brings more good, okay? I, however, think there's more good than the negative aspects for tourism, right? So think about it and draw up your mind map. Practice question 3. It has been suggested that everyone in the world wants to own a car, a television, and a fridge. Do you think the disadvantages of such a development outweigh the advantages? Now, again, what do you think? It's done the other way around. So, do you think the bad outweighs the advantages? Okay. So again, you'll have to think about the pros and the cons and then write an answer. So the outweigh style tends to be a little prominent and a bit difficult, okay? Practice question 4. Children are taught to push themselves to try to be better than their classmates rather than work together for everyone's benefit. Do you think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? Now it depends, okay? I've seen mostly in our culture, it's quite prominent, okay, where we say, oh, do it better, do it better, do it better, okay? But we don't kind of encourage them to work as a group and to follow rules and regulations, to respect each other. I think we forget most of that, okay, as a culture. But I've seen in some other countries that it's more about group work, doing things together, more assignments, group assignments, finding things, lots of other activities than just doing the normal maths and the English and the science, to get marks than the others, right? So it depends how you feel, okay? Do you think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? Okay, so I personally don't think there are a lot of advantages when you tell your kids to be better than the classmates, okay? So what do you think about it? It's your own personal view. You can take either side, so you can write down the points for it. So think about the ideas that you would want to do. Right? So now I've done 2 essays with you. The most important point is that you jot down ideas and start writing it. Essay writing is all about practice, okay? So I can put down the answers for all of this, okay? Put down all the ideas that I have, but that's not going to help you to think out of the box, right? So again, I'd like you to put the pros. What are the positives? What are the negatives? And then think about the mind map. How do you want to jot down these answers, right? The most important thing is for you to be able to think the points. Now, what most students tell me is, Miss, what am I supposed to write for this? Miss, mata liyanna ek ideas ene. So the problem is you lack practice and you don't think, okay? So for us as well, it's the same. How do we develop that? By reading and looking around and obviously searching for points, okay? So what I do is I always sit a bit, think down, what am I going to talk about in this topic? And then actually start writing. So I think that is the most important thing for you as well, okay? Practice question 5. People can eat a wide variety of food of other regions. As a result, they are eating a lot of foreign food instead of locally produced food. Do you think the advantages of eating foreign food are more than it harms? It depends, okay? I sometimes think that some foreign food are good, right? But it depends. Now, for Sri Lanka, I think it's all about the main meal is being rice and curry and eating all of these, the curries and the jackfruit and all of that, right? But some people don't like to eat it. I mean, even the fruits, we've got lots of fruits. We've got mango, we've got bananas, we've got pepper, we've got pomegranates, okay? But lots of people like to give their kids like apples and grapes and oranges, which actually don't grow in Sri Lanka, okay? So what do you think about it? Do you think the foreign food is better than the local food, or should you actually give local food than foreign food? Okay, so think about the positives. So locally grown food, produced food are much fresh, okay? You could find organic food, which is healthier, and it's got less, chemicals in it. However, the variety might be limited. So if you take foreign food, you've got a lot of variety. You could then have, a taste to the different cultural food, right? But it could be that you have to put in a lot of more chemicals to keep it for a longer period because you need to ship it to certain countries. So think about the positives and the negatives, okay? And the last question for you is all about fossil fuels. So what I have tried to touch on is different essay topics, okay? So you can see television to food to fossil fuels. So a variety of topics, and that's what you should be looking at, okay? So fossil fuels like coal, oil and natural gas are the main sources in many countries. But in some countries, the use of alternative sources of energy like wind and solar are encouraged, okay? Are encouraged. It should be are encouraged, D there, okay? To what extent do you think it is a positive or negative development? So what do you think? All right, so moving on to the next question, question number 6. Now this one is about fossil fuels. Now if you can see, we've had a look at different types of questions, right? We've had a look at how TVs, cars and refrigerators are important. Then we've had a look at children being taught to being pushed more against working as groups. Then we've had a look at wide variety of food, and then we've had a look at fossil fuels. Now when you're practicing, it's important that you practice with different topics so that you get exposed to different words, vocabulary, and it helps you to improve on the range of vocabulary. Okay, so don't write everything on technology or about kids or about food. Use different topics, right? Fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas are the main sources in many countries, but in some countries, the use of alternative sources of energy such as wind and solar energy are encouraged. To what extent do you think it is a positive or negative development? So this again is your opinion, right? So do you think fossil fuels is better, or do you think we should encourage more alternative sources, right? So fossil fuels, for me, I think we should encourage more alternative sources, right? Because fossil fuels can be really expensive, right? And you never know when you can run out of it. Whereas alternative sources could be much cheaper. You could also use the natural sources around your country or the place where you live, so it would be more reliable. But saying so, this could also mean that sometimes you don't have wind. Sometimes, you know, during the seasons, the rainy season, or if you're in a different country where you have winter and autumn, you might not have enough light, okay, so sunlight. So these depend. You could talk about positives and negatives. Both of them have positives as well as negatives. So which one do you want to talk about, okay? For me personally, I feel alternative sources are good. I would take an example like Sri Lanka, where alternative sources are better because we do have the natural resources for it. However, some other countries might not always see that as a positive, okay? So think about the pros and the cons, and then you could write how you feel about it. Now, so having a look at a recap of what we have done today in this lesson, we've had a look at advantages and disadvantages of styles of essays, right? So I told you there are two main styles where they could talk about the advantages only, or they could talk about the advantages and the disadvantages, or they could even talk about the outweigh. Do the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? So you've seen a lot of different types of essay questions. I've done two with you to show you the structure and to show you how the cohesive devices could be used. Should you write the advantages? Should you write the disadvantages? Should you refute? So what are the strategies that you could use? So with that, we come to the end of the lesson, which was all about advantages and disadvantage essays.